When you feel lonely or broken, the very first and most crucial step is to acknowledge that feeling. Often we try to deny it, suppress it, or cover it up with distractions. We convince ourselves that we are fine, that we should be stronger, that others have it worse and we have no right to feel the way we do. But this denial doesn't heal us, it only prolongs the pain. There is a quiet strength in looking at yourself honestly and admitting, yes, I am hurting. Yes, I feel alone. This is not weakness. It is the beginning of healing. Think of it this way: if a person is physically injured but refuses to acknowledge their wound, it festers, it worsens, and eventually it becomes far more serious. But the moment they recognize it, the moment they say, "This hurts, I need to care for it," they open the door to treatment and recovery. Emotional pain works the same way. When we pretend it isn't there, it takes deeper root. When we face it, we start to loosen its grip. Acknowledgement is not the same as surrender. It does not mean you are giving in to despair. In fact, it is the opposite. It is an act of courage. By naming the feeling, you are saying to yourself, I am aware of what is happening within me, and I am willing to confront it. This level of awareness is the foundation of emotional resilience. Psychology teaches us that self-awareness is the first step toward growth, and philosophy reminds us that the examined life is the meaningful life. When you pause and acknowledge your loneliness or brokenness, you are living consciously, not passively drifting in your pain. There is another dimension to this acknowledgement. It humanizes you. Too often we buy into the illusion that strength means never breaking down. But let me remind you, strength is not the absence of weakness. It is how you deal with weakness when it shows up. The strongest people are not those who never cry, but those who can look at their tears and say, this is part of being human and I will face it. When you acknowledge your loneliness, you are reconnecting with your humanity, with the reality that to feel deeply, even pain, is part of what it means to be alive. And here is something profound. Feelings lose some of their power when you give them a name. Loneliness, sadness, anxiety, these emotions thrive in the shadows. They feed on silence and secrecy. But when you say, I feel lonely, you drag that feeling into the light. You expose it. You see it for what it is, a passing state of mind, not your permanent identity. This shift in perspective allows you to deal with your emotions instead of being consumed by them. Acknowledging how you feel also creates the possibility of connection. Imagine you walk into a room and everyone seems to be smiling, laughing, posting their perfect lives on social media. You might think you are the only one struggling, but in reality, many of those same people are quietly battling their own loneliness. When you are honest enough to say, I am not okay, you open the door for others to say, me too. That is how real connections begin, through truth, not through pretense. There is also a spiritual wisdom in acknowledgement. For centuries, teachers, philosophers, and spiritual guides have reminded us that before we can rise, we must recognize where we stand. If you deny that you are in darkness, how will you ever search for light? But the moment you admit, I am in the dark, the possibility of seeking light becomes real. Acknowledgement awakens the desire for change. It stirs the heart to move. It transforms pain from a vague burden into a clear signal pointing you toward what needs healing. Do not fear your loneliness. Do not fear your brokenness. They are not signs of failure, but reminders of your depth. They tell you that you are alive, that you can still feel, that you have not become numb to existence. And in that realization lies hope. For if you can feel the pain, you can also feel the healing. If you can acknowledge the emptiness, you can also recognize when it begins to be filled. So, the next time you feel lonely or broken, pause for a moment. Take a breath, and instead of running away from the feeling, turn towards it. Say it to yourself, softly but firmly. This is what I feel. No judgment, no denial, just acknowledgement. That moment of honesty with yourself is not small. It is the seed of transformation. Because you cannot heal what you refuse to face, and you cannot rise until you first admit that you have fallen. Once you have acknowledged the feeling of loneliness or brokenness, the next realization that must follow is this: you are not alone in your loneliness. It may sound paradoxical, but it is profoundly true. Loneliness is one of the most universal experiences of being human, and yet when we are in it, we believe it singles us out, that somehow we are the only ones left behind, while everyone else is connected, loved, and fulfilled. That illusion is one of the cruelest tricks the mind can play. It isolates us further, making us withdraw even more deeply. But the reality is different. The reality is that everyone at some point in their journey has walked through the valley of loneliness. Think about it. Across cultures, across times, across ages, human beings have written songs, poems, and stories about loneliness. Why? Because it is shared. From the philosopher reflecting on the silence of existence, to the child who feels invisible in a crowded classroom, to the elderly parent longing for company in their final years, loneliness visits us all. Even those who appear to have it all together, who fill their lives with laughter and company, have nights when they sit in silence and feel a hollow ache inside. The problem is that we rarely admit it, because our world has taught us that loneliness is something to be ashamed of, as though it signals failure or inadequacy. But in truth, loneliness is not evidence of failure, it is evidence of being human. Philosophically, loneliness is part of the condition of self-awareness. Unlike animals, we carry an inner consciousness that allows us to reflect, to question, to feel separate even when surrounded by people. This inner awareness is both a gift and a burden. It allows us to seek meaning, to build civilizations, to connect on deeper levels, but it also leaves us open to the piercing recognition of aloneness. When you understand this, you stop personalizing your loneliness as if it only belongs to you, and you start seeing it as part of the larger human story. That awareness alone begins to lighten the weight. There is also a psychological dimension here that is worth noting. Studies show that when people believe they are alone in their struggles, the weight of the burden feels heavier. But when they realize others share the same experience, the suffering decreases. This is not because the external circumstances have changed, but because the mind shifts from isolation to solidarity. There is healing simply in knowing I am not the only one. That knowledge connects you to the invisible network of humanity. In practical terms, this means that the very thing you are afraid to share, your loneliness, your brokenness, might be the very thing that bonds you most deeply with others. Vulnerability creates connection. When you open up and say, I feel lonely, you are not making yourself weaker. You are extending a hand to others who have felt the same. And more often than not, someone will take that hand because they too have been waiting for someone to admit what they silently feel. We live in a world that glorifies external connection, but quietly suffers internal disconnection. Social media can give the impression that everyone is surrounded by friends and happiness. Yet behind those smiling photos, countless people are longing for real conversations, real companionship, real understanding. The danger is that we measure ourselves against the illusion of others' lives and conclude we are the only ones missing out. But if we could look behind the curtain, if we could see into people's hearts, we would realize how many of them echo the same emptiness we feel. Here's something powerful to consider. Loneliness can become a bridge instead of a barrier. The same ache that makes you feel separate can also help you understand the pain of others, and in that understanding you can build compassion. And compassion is what truly connects people. The great thinkers and teachers across history have often lived through profound loneliness, but they used it to connect with the struggles of humanity at large. Their solitude gave them insight, and their insight gave them the ability to reach out meaningfully. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed by loneliness, pause and remind yourself, this is not only my story, this is our story. You may not see it, but somewhere, someone else is sitting with the same heaviness, perhaps even at this very moment. And if you can carry that awareness in your heart, it transforms loneliness from a private prison into a shared human experience. You're not strange. You are not abandoned. You are walking a path that countless others are walking too. And maybe that realization will push you to do something small but powerful. Reach out, send a message, make a call, smile at someone, listen without distraction. You might discover that what you thought was just your own loneliness is actually a doorway to connecting with others who need exactly the same thing. You are not alone in your loneliness. You never were, you never will be. And once you truly grasp that, the silence of loneliness becomes less of an echo chamber and more of a reminder you belong to the human family, even in your solitude. Because the deepest truth is this: loneliness loses its power when you realize it is shared. Once you acknowledge your pain and recognize that you are not alone in experiencing it, the natural question becomes, what now? Where do you go from there? And here lies a truth that many overlook. Healing does not usually come in the form of one grand breakthrough or a sudden moment of transformation. It often begins with the smallest of steps. We tend to underestimate the power of small, consistent actions because our minds crave dramatic solutions. But when you are lonely or broken, the shift often starts in subtle, almost invisible ways. Think of it like recovering from an injury. You don't run a marathon the day after breaking your leg. You start with tiny, tentative movements. You strengthen yourself little by little until walking becomes possible again and eventually running. In the same way, emotional wounds don't heal overnight. They need gentle care, patience, and the courage to keep moving, even if those movements seem insignificant at first. Psychologically, this makes sense. The human brain thrives on momentum, not perfection. When you do something small, like stepping outside to feel the sun on your face, calling a friend for a short conversation, or writing down a few lines of your thoughts, you create micro shifts in your state of being. These small steps interrupt the heaviness and begin to remind your mind and body that change is possible. A single step may not look like much, but it carries symbolic power. It says, I refuse to remain where I am. I am choosing movement over stagnation. Philosophically, there is something profound here. Life itself is built upon small movements, not giant leaps. A tree grows ring by ring, almost unnoticed. A river carves valleys over centuries, drop by drop. The stars that light our night sky are burning slowly, consistently, in silence. Why should our healing be any different? We honor the dignity of our humanity when we allow small steps to count as progress. But here is where many people falter. When brokenness weighs heavily, we feel pressure to fix everything immediately. We want instant relief, and when that relief doesn't come, we fall deeper into despair, telling ourselves, nothing will ever change. This is why it is vital to shift your perspective. Healing is not an event, it is a process. And processes are built one action at a time. Do not despise the small act, because the small act is what opens the way to the larger transformation. For example, maybe you wake up feeling the crushing weight of loneliness. Instead of expecting yourself to be joyful by noon, simply decide to take one meaningful action. Go for a short walk, breathe deeply for a few minutes, or make yourself a nourishing meal. That may sound trivial, but it is not. It is a statement to your own soul. I care enough to take a step. Over time, these steps accumulate. They build resilience, they restore confidence, and they reintroduce you to the possibility of joy. And do not overlook the spiritual significance of these small steps. Often people wait for an overwhelming burst of faith, clarity, or divine intervention. But throughout history, wisdom has reminded us that even a single sincere prayer, a quiet reflection, or an act of kindness can be the spark that shifts the soul. You may not feel an instant change, but that does not mean nothing is happening. Just as a seed works beneath the soil before you see the sprout, so too does healing work beneath the surface before you see the results. Another point worth noting is that small steps break the illusion of helplessness. One of the hardest parts of loneliness and brokenness is the belief that you are powerless. But when you take even a tiny action, you prove to yourself that you are not powerless at all. You cannot control everything, but you can control something. And that something, repeated daily, builds strength. It restores dignity to your journey. Remember, no orchestra begins with a symphony. It begins with a single note. No book begins with a masterpiece. It begins with one word. And no life is rebuilt in a single day. It is rebuilt through steady, intentional steps. The moment you honor those small steps, you honor the process of healing itself. So if you are sitting here listening, thinking, but I don't know where to start, let me tell you this. Start anywhere. Start with what is within your reach, no matter how simple. It could be standing up, taking a breath, opening the window, or reaching out to someone you trust. Do not underestimate it. Healing is not about how quickly you move. It is about the direction you choose to face. Because every great journey begins with a single step. And when you are lonely or broken, that one step can be the difference between remaining in darkness and slowly walking toward the light. Once you begin to take those small steps toward healing, something remarkable starts to happen. You realize that you don't have to carry your pain alone. But here is the challenge. To share your struggles requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is something we often mistake for weakness. We live in a world that teaches us to wear masks, to appear strong, to keep our wounds hidden. We are told that to expose our struggles is to invite judgment, rejection, or pity. So we conceal what hurts most while presenting an image of control. Yet ironically, this very concealment keeps us trapped. The truth is, vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is a form of strength. Perhaps one of the greatest strengths a human being can develop. It takes courage to say, I am not okay. It takes resilience to open up and let others see the parts of you that you wish you could hide. And it takes wisdom to realize that in our brokenness, we often find our deepest connections. Psychologists remind us that intimacy, whether with friends, family, or even a community, cannot exist without vulnerability. You cannot truly connect with someone if you are always hiding behind a polished facade. What connects us most deeply is not our perfection, but our imperfection. When you reveal your struggle, you give others permission to reveal theirs. That is how bonds are formed, not through shared success stories, but through shared humanity. Philosophically, vulnerability is the acknowledgement of our finite nature. We are not limitless beings. We get hurt, we get tired, we fall short. To admit this is not to diminish ourselves, but to embrace reality. And in embracing reality, we find strength. Because only when you know the truth of who you are, including your weaknesses, can you begin to grow. Pretending to be invincible may impress others for a while, but it robs you of authenticity, and authenticity is the foundation of meaningful life. Consider how often we admire people who speak openly about their struggles. When someone shares their story of loss, failure, or recovery, we don't see them as weak. We see them as strong, relatable, inspiring. Why? Because their vulnerability touches something in us. It reminds us that we are not alone. It makes us feel seen. Their openness becomes a gift, and that gift strengthens not just them, but everyone who listens. And yet, many of us still resist vulnerability because we fear rejection. We think, if I tell people how I really feel, they will walk away. But the paradox is this: the people who truly care about you will not walk away because of your honesty. They will draw closer, and those who do distance themselves, they were never meant to be the ones who hold your heart anyway. Vulnerability then is not just about sharing, it is about sifting. It reveals who your real supporters are. There is also a spiritual beauty in vulnerability. To open yourself up is to acknowledge your dependence, not only on other people but also on the divine. The one who says, I can handle everything on my own, eventually breaks under the weight of pride. But the one who admits, I cannot do this alone, I need help, finds strength in humility. Vulnerability creates space for grace, for love, for guidance to enter. Now, I am not suggesting you must share your pain with everyone. Vulnerability does not mean spilling your heart carelessly. It means choosing wisely who to trust and then allowing them to see you as you are. Even one safe connection can transform loneliness into belonging. The point is not to expose yourself to everyone, but to refuse to imprison yourself in isolation. Here is the shift that happens when you embrace vulnerability. What once felt like shame becomes a source of connection. What once seemed like a weakness becomes a doorway to strength. And what once isolated you begins to draw people closer. You start to realize that your story, even with its cracks, can be light for someone else. So, do not be afraid of your vulnerability. It does not make you small, it makes you real. And being real is what the world needs more of. The polished masks may impress, but they don't heal. It is the open heart, the honest word, the brave admission of struggle that brings healing to both you and those around you. Because in the end, strength is not found in how well you hide your scars, it is found in how bravely you show them and how you let them become bridges to others. When you acknowledge your pain, recognize that you are not alone. Take small steps toward healing and allow yourself to be vulnerable. You begin to notice something deeper, that pain itself carries a kind of meaning, a hidden purpose that only becomes clear when you reflect on it. This may be difficult to accept at first, because when you are hurting, the last thing you want to hear is that there is some kind of purpose behind your suffering. But think carefully. So much of what has shaped your strength, your empathy, your wisdom, has come not from comfort but from struggle. Psychologists often speak about post-traumatic growth, the idea that adversity can lead not just to recovery but to transformation. People who go through hardship often emerge with a clearer sense of priorities, deeper compassion for others, and a stronger appreciation for life. The very things that once threatened to break them end up forging resilience. This doesn't mean we seek out pain or glorify suffering. It means that when pain comes, as it inevitably does, we can choose to use it as a teacher rather than only as a tormentor. Philosophically, pain forces us to confront questions we might otherwise avoid. When everything is easy, we live on the surface. But when life breaks us, we are compelled to go deeper. We ask, what really matters? What is worth holding on to? What gives my life meaning, even when it hurts? These questions shape us in ways that comfort never could. Pain strips away illusions and reveals truths. It shows us that life is fragile, that people are precious, that time is fleeting. It forces us to see clearly what we often ignore when distracted by ease. Look at history and you'll notice that some of the greatest leaders, thinkers, and artists were people who endured profound suffering. Their wisdom was not born in comfort but in crisis. Their compassion was not developed in abundance but in loss. Their creativity was not fueled by perfection, but by brokenness. Their pain became the soil from which their purpose grew, and the same possibility exists for you. What feels like a wound today may one day be the very place from which your deepest contribution to the world arises. But here is the key: purpose in pain is not automatic. It requires a choice. Two people can go through the same hardship, yet one becomes bitter while the other becomes wiser. What makes the difference is how they interpret their experience. If you see pain only as cruelty, it will crush you. But if you see it as a call to growth, it will shape you. This is why acknowledgement, connection, small steps, and vulnerability matter so much. They prepare your heart to see purpose where others might only see despair. Think of your own life for a moment. The times when you've grown the most, when you've discovered your true strength, were they not often the times when you were tested? The friendships that mean the most, the values you hold most deeply, didn't many of them emerge from moments when you needed them most? Even your empathy, the ability to feel with others, comes from knowing what it means to hurt. Pain has a way of softening the heart, reminding us that we are all fragile, that kindness is never wasted. Spiritually too, there is wisdom in seeing pain as purposeful. It can be a reminder that this world is temporary, that true peace is not in possessions or status, but in the depth of our hearts and our connection with the divine. Pain humbles us. It brings us to our knees, often in ways nothing else can. And in that humility, we find clarity. We realize that we are not self-sufficient, that we need guidance, that we must anchor our lives to something greater than ourselves. So the challenge is not to avoid pain, because that is impossible. The challenge is to let your pain shape you without hardening you, to let it refine you, not define you, to allow it to push you closer to purpose rather than further into despair. And here is the beautiful paradox. Once you find purpose in your pain, it ceases to feel like wasted suffering. It becomes part of your story, a story that not only heals you but can inspire and guide others. In fact, some of the people you may one day help will only be able to relate to you because of the very struggles you've been through. Your pain becomes the bridge by which you reach them. So when you feel lonely or broken, remember this: your pain is not meaningless. It can become the place where your deepest strength, your clearest values, and your highest purpose are born. Because pain, when embraced with courage and reflection, does not just wound, it awakens. When you have acknowledged your loneliness or brokenness, when you have recognized that you are not alone, when you have begun to take small steps toward healing, embraced the strength of vulnerability, and even discovered purpose within your pain, what remains is the final and perhaps most powerful truth: hope and renewal are always possible. No matter how heavy life feels, no matter how deep the darkness may seem, there is always a way forward. Hopelessness whispers that your story is over, that what you are facing is final. But hope reminds you that every moment carries the potential for change. And renewal does not require your circumstances to shift overnight. It begins the moment you decide that your pain will not define your future. To believe in renewal is to believe that your life is not a closed book, but a story still being written. Psychologically, this is vital. Studies in resilience show that people who hold on to even a flicker of hope are far more likely to recover, to rebuild, to rise again. Hope acts like fuel for the soul. It energizes action, sustains perseverance, and sparks creativity in finding solutions. Without it, even small challenges feel impossible. With it, even great obstacles can be faced with dignity. Renewal does not depend on removing every problem from your life, but on nurturing the belief that tomorrow can look different from today. Philosophically, hope is a defiance against despair. It is the human spirit's refusal to surrender to nothingness. Throughout history, individuals and entire communities have endured incredible suffering, yet they carried within them a vision of renewal. That vision pulled them forward even when logic said there was no way out. Renewal often begins as something unseen, an inner conviction that life is not static, that seasons change, that the heart which feels shattered today can one day beat with peace again. Think of nature. The tree that looks barren in winter bursts with life in spring. The soil that seems lifeless after harvest teems with new growth when the rains return. Even the darkest night gives way to the morning. Renewal is written into the fabric of existence. Why should your life be any different? You may feel like winter has consumed your soul, but remember, winter is never the end. It is a season. Renewal will come. But hope is not passive. It is not just sitting and waiting for things to change. Real hope demands that you act, even in small ways, toward the possibility of renewal. It asks you to keep moving forward, to keep planting seeds, to keep trusting that the effort will one day bear fruit. And when you falter, as all of us do, hope reminds you to rise again, because falling is not failing unless you refuse to stand up. Spiritually, hope connects us to something greater than ourselves. When you look at your life only through your own limited lens, despair seems natural. But when you lift your gaze and recognize that there is a divine wisdom guiding the universe, even your brokenness takes on a different meaning. You begin to trust that renewal is not just possible, but promised, that every hardship carries within it the seed of ease, and that no darkness lasts forever. Hope then becomes more than just optimism. It becomes faith in renewal, a trust that your journey is still unfolding with purpose. Here is the beautiful truth. Every story of healing, every testimony of resilience, begins with someone who refused to believe that their pain was the end. They dared to believe in renewal. They chose to take the next step, however small. They chose to see light, even when surrounded by shadows. And because they chose, their lives changed. So, if you are feeling lonely, if you are feeling broken, hold on to this truth. Your current chapter is not your final one. Hope can be fragile, like a single flame, but even one flame is enough to light the path in darkness. Protect that flame. Feed it with small acts of courage, with moments of gratitude, with reminders that you have endured before and can endure again. And trust that renewal is already unfolding, often in ways you cannot yet see. Because no matter how deep the wound, healing is possible. No matter how long the night, dawn will come. And no matter how heavy your loneliness or brokenness feels, there is always a way to rise, to rebuild, to begin again. So do not give up. Do not close your heart. Do not declare the end before the story is finished. Because the truth is this: hope is stronger than despair, and renewal is always closer than you think.